So we could say it's a no-brainer, right?
This is something I always look for when looking into companies.
It would be great for investors watching this podcast to take a look.
Also very common for investors to invest in early resource projects. So this was it was a good fertile ground to get started.
The verdict between Australia versus the USA, which is better, which is more promising. Welcome back to the Natural Hydrogen Investment Podcast, where we help you understand the evolving opportunity of the natural hydrogen industry. I'm Anthony Muhye, chemical engineer and natural hydrogen enthusiast.
And I'm Morten Stahl, specialized investor and founder of Natural Hydrogen Ventures.
Remember that we have our Natural Hydrogen Investor Report 2025 on our website, nath2investing.com. There you can find so many new insights and information about the publicly traded companies, or top 10 publicly traded companies, and the biggest private companies in the space. It's actually been updated pretty recently, so take a look. If you didn't have it, it's great because you'll be able to sign up for our newsletter. It comes out bi-weekly, has a lot of information you'll be interested in. Share it with your colleagues as well. And talking about sharing with your colleagues, if you listen to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please subscribe and share it with your colleagues. And if you watch it on YouTube, like and subscribe. Today, we have an episode which is a continuation of the Natural Hydrogen Nations mini-series we've been building. This one is, Morten, am I allowed to sing a bit in this podcast?
Always. We sing way too little. Please.
Okay. Can I say that today we are going to the land down under, which is Australia. This episode is going to be the Australian powerhouse. So we're going to cover how Australia has become an interesting and very significant leader in this space, especially as we could say it's where the space was originated. Am I allowed to say something like this, or is it a bit too controversial?
Maybe you'll piss off the French guys a bit, but but definitely a big player in this,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to be accurate when I say that. So I will be asking Morten a few things. He'll be sharing a bit more about the companies, and we'll be exploring how Australia measures up against the US at the end. So stay tuned. So let's start from the beginning, Morten. Why have we chosen Australia for this episode?
Well, obviously, as you just hinted at, Australia has a very big role to play and are playing a very big role in natural hydrogen because they were one of the first countries to allow for natural hydrogen exploration, getting an exact license for natural hydrogen in South Australia. So this is the main reason. Also, we've seen a lot of companies starting out in Australia. So yeah, this is as many people in the industry would know, a lot of the companies working in this industry are Australia. If they're not Canadian, as we covered in a previous episode, there's quite a lot of Canadian companies as well.
Right. So we could say it's a no-brainer, right? We have to make an episode about Australia.
Yeah.
Canada was the first one in our mini-series, as you may know. And if you haven't watched it, please go and watch it. So Australia, let's narrow down. Besides why we've chosen Australia, why Australia is in natural hydrogen. So let's explore a bit more about natural hydrogen boom. What's going on in Australia?
Well, obviously, Australia being like Canada and America to some degree, they are much more open to resource exploration. You already in Australia have oil and gas exploration, mining. It's very common to do this. It's also very common for investors to invest in early resource projects. So it was a good fertile ground to get started. I remember that to actually be allowed to get a license, South Australia and France were very close. But for the reason I just mentioned, is likely the reason we've seen many more companies starting out in Australia. So this is the starting ground. And this is also Australia that has many companies working, and we have had wells drilled. We know gold hydrogen drilled wells. So there's just a lot of information coming out on natural hydrogen. You have a quite active official, I don't know if it's a government agency, but CSIRO that does a lot of sampling and support knowledge of the industry in Australia as well.
And also, just bringing in my past background into the space, I think green hydrogen is also very big in Australia. So So the shift to natural hydrogen is a bit of it makes a lot of sense since they're already very involved with solar energy, with hydropower, wind, offshore and onshore. So I think, yeah, natural hydrogen makes a good fit for Australia besides the oil and gas and the mining experience. It's good to see, actually. And also the support that you mentioned, which is the public support towards natural hydrogen, which is something you don't see everywhere else. Okay, so you already mentioned gold hydrogen. We're probably going to start with them. Uh, let's start with the companies in this space and see which ones are interesting and which ones are well, of course, we will stay relevant to the publicly traded companies, which is something I need to mention here to our viewers. But tell us more about them, Morten.
Of course. Well, yeah, we'll do like we done the Canada episode as well. We'll walk through the public companies since these are the companies that everyone can go out and invest in if you feel interested. This is not investment advice. This is just us using public available information. Telling highlighting some of the differences between the companies. As you mentioned, gold hydrogen is the obvious first one. They drilled wells. And also Gold Hydrogen is one of our sponsors. They're supporting us, supporting the industry. So for this reason, we will elaborate a bit more on what they're doing. So Gold Hydrogen was actually the first company to get a license granted. First, I'm quite sure they were first to apply and get a license granted in Australia. In Australia, it's really the land of big numbers. You would see a lot of companies being able to tell that they have an acreage size the size of Belgium or Denmark, where I'm from. Compared with US, it's much smaller sizes. There's a lot of companies that have applied for a lot, and Gold Hydrogen is the company that has both applied for the biggest, square kilometers of natural hydrogen exploration acreage, but also the company who have been granted, actually been said, yeah, you can go do it. They have like 8,000 square kilometers actual granted in the York Peninsula and Kangaroo Island. And again, you got to say, as a non-Australian, that is the fact that it's called Kangaroo Island just makes people think that this is not real, what you're talking about. But there is an island called Kangaroo Island, and Gold Hydrogen has the license. What set Gold Hydrogen apart from many other companies in the space is obviously that they have drilled wells. They've drilled 2 purpose-drilled natural hydrogen wells in the York Peninsula in Australia. They have discovered hydrogen and helium. No, of what is known at least, no commercial flows, but they have confirmed that there's hydrogen in the system. They even found helium-3, which is a very valuable form of helium. They also, which is very important when I, as a private investor, look into companies, can they raise funds? Will they actually have enough capital to go do their plans in real life? And Gold Hydrogen is the public company that raised most cash so far, and they recently raised 14 million Aussie dollars from big name investors like Toyota, Mitsubishi, Ineos, and surprisingly, and this is an investor fun fact. Really, I think we touched on it earlier. They raised this at a premium to the share price. They raised it as 70 cents. That's 22% higher that the stock were actually trading that day, and also has been trading lately. And this is just so different from any other industry, and also what we see this industry doing in Canada, that you often, and that's actually very normal, that you go out and raise money at a discount to the stock price being traded. So these new investors must have seen something they really, really liked in this company, paying a 22% premium.
Can I shortly interrupt to leave a short ad in this video? If you want to know a bit more about Gold Hydrogen, just remember, or if you didn't know, we actually did an interview with Gold Hydrogen's managing director, which is Neil McDonald. We did it with him a while back. So please check it out if you want to get the details of this investment and the details about the helium-3, which Morten just mentioned, which is a $20 million per kilo commodity. So very interesting that they also have this ability to monetize through helium. Back to you, Morten.
Yeah, well, probably. I don't remember that price of helium-3, but it's an insanely huge number, and one could, of course, wonder, how much can actually be produced. I don't know. We're of course mostly into the hydrogen part of it, but helium for many natural hydrogen explorers is a very welcomed uh, 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 accessory, you could say, when looking
Yeah.
for a collateral when you're drilling. Uh, just finalizing, because I think it will be important when we try to compare companies. When recording, gold hydrogen's market cap is roughly 100 million Aussie dollars. And with the recently raised funds, they're expected to have maybe 25 million US Aussie dollars on their balance sheet, meaning that they are, likely to be able to, they have communicated that they are able to finance their drilling campaign they are planning, in the months going forward. And that, as an investor, of course, is interesting because when you go out and drill more wells, that leaves, potential trigger opportunities. They could go out and find something really interesting, or the opposite. So this is something I always look for when looking
Yes.
into companies. That was gold hydrogen, I think, the
Yes.
biggest, the highest valued company in the space. But there's a lot going on in Australia. And if you don't mind, Anthony, I'll just, I have a list here and I'll fire away. Do you have
That's
any
fine.
preferred company?
What I did want to add was I particularly enjoyed Neil McDonald's quote. Actually, I can't call it a quote because I don't remember exactly what he said, sadly. But he talked a lot about energy security and availability across the nation, because he said natural hydrogen, of course, you might find it in the middle of nowhere, far away from populations, but where you do find it, in Australia and countries like Australia, which are so extensive and separated from each other, all of these populations, you'll it will benefit so many people's lives, people in developing countries, especially, which he mentioned. I appreciated it. Also having lived in a country which has a lot of energy issues. Uh, it's very important that natural hydrogen continues to be explored around the world, because it will allow this security that many nations they wouldn't have otherwise, and they will depend. Many nations already depend on uh, gas oil, or very like kerosene, or old, very primitive fuels. So it's nice to know that we now have
I,
natural hydrogen as an option.
I totally get your point, and I think coming out of Europe, where clean energy is a big thing, obviously this is something that we think a lot of, myself at least. But natural hydrogen's potential for energy security, that's important, and we need to talk more about that. I think Luke, the CEO of Top End Energy, recently posted on this. He's working in the US. We will actually mention the company later, but also stressing the energy security part of natural hydrogen, of course, important for how the US sees stuff recently, that being strong on energy is important. But we'll get back to that very short at the end. But right now, we'll move into the still bigger players in actually Australia. This is actually important to mention that by Australia companies, we mean companies that are actually working in Australia. Many people would know that Hytera is as an Australian listed company, but actually works in US. So therefore, we will not be discussing Hytera today, but we will be discussing Thor Energy. Thor Energy is one of the kind of recent, players into this game. I think less than a year ago, Thor Energy took over some assets in South Australia. The first companies we'll walk through is from South Australia, for the reason that in South Australia, you have a clear road to a license. And there are some other territories in Australia where it's likely the case, but we don't know yet. So we will start out with South Australia. They took over some assets, 6,000 or so square kilometers granted license, very close to Adelaide. This is interesting when you discuss Australia, because it's a really big country. Very often you could assume whatever you're doing, it's remote, but this is kind of close to Adelaide, a bit closer than Gold, but they're also still close. Thor Energy is a mining company turning into a natural hydrogen company. We've seen a lot of these in Canada. Uh, what Thor seems to be the expert in right now is actually getting some good money out of their legacy assets.
Yeah.
And quite impressively, again, the date of recording, uh, I remember them doing a few deals that gave them some cash, and many mining companies would just try to get rid of it so it's not a liability. But they recently announced that they'll be selling part of a project that will give them more than 6 million Aussie dollars in cash and shares over the next years, and 2 million in the next year in cash. And this is interesting from an investor point of view, but because this, of course, give Thor Energy the possibility to start doing their work program without raising cash from investors, diluting the company, the shareholders. So this is really interesting. Currently, the market cap of this company is roughly 11 million Aussie dollars, with 1.5 million dollars on the balance sheet. Meaning, and this is not counting what they will get in from the recently announced deal. So again, you quickly see the difference in companies. It's a 10 times smaller company than gold, measured in market cap.
The interesting thing is their high range project, right?
You're right. Yeah, the high range, and that is the close to Adelaide granted license they have. They have something a bit further away, but still in Australian terms, not that remote, you could say.
Yeah. And they had a prospective resource done, a study, which was the big announcement they made at the start of this of their entry into natural hydrogen.
Yeah, they do actually, they do have a prospective resource. Quite a few companies have this. I was kind of thinking to leave it out of today's discussion because it's a bit wobbly still,
Okay.
because it's still new, but it's good, and they have an interesting. So does gold hydrogen have a prospective resource, but I think for many investors, could be difficult to grasp. But you go look for it. It's out there, and it's mentioned in our investor report.
Yes.
So if you're interested to look into the estimated resources these companies have, check out the investor report. They are all mentioned. So good. Now it's me doing the commercial for the investor report just once.
Yeah.
But thank you for reminding me. All right. Then there's let's walk through a bit quicker. Some still in South Australia. We have Prominence Energy, which recently, again, a very small mining company taking over some South Australian assets, and that's one of these licenses had been granted. So they have again a granted license, and the reason why that means so much in Australia is because you can actually have applications for a very long time. That is all but you're almost certain that you'll actually get it, but you're required to do some more work to agree with original landowners how to access it. So things only start happening when they're actually granted, and almost 3,000 square kilometers of Prominence's Golar hydrogen project is now granted, and it still has very low market cap, 2.6 million Aussie dollars. I'm sure that will change. I don't think the deal has actually closed. So if you're an investor interested in this company, go check that out, before it's out, because finalizing the acquisition of these assets will probably mean more shares will be issued. Then we have White Bark Energy.
Just
also
a quick.
in South Australia.
I have to make a quick interruption because I wanted to mention about Prominence Energy. The COO, her name is Krista Davids. She made a very interesting post, which I think everybody who is in the natural hydrogen space should read. A while back, it's called "The One Thing Investors Need to Know About the Natural Hydrogen Industry." Since our podcast is about investment, I think it would be important. Posted on July 29th. So if you go to her LinkedIn profile, you'll be able to see it. Had a lot of controversy, good and bad. So it would be great for investors watching this podcast to take a look. Back to you.
But no doubt, and Krista has been part of this industry from, I would say, from the outset. It's remember the collection of assets that she has collected, and much of it is now in Prominence Energy. Yeah, she's been doing a good job, and I like the post as well. But yeah, because we have so many companies, I'll do my Morten thing, and I'll be speedy talking. White Bark Energy, that is still South Australia, but it's in the Officer Basin. So it's no offense, White Bark, but it's a bit more remote. the area. It's an area that it seems to have a lot of available data, because I understand it to be old oil and gas exploration areas. So that also means that they are communicating the opportunity to have both fossil or hydrocarbons and hydrogen and helium. So from an investment point of view, we are moving a bit out of the almost pure play companies. Investing into White Bark, it seems you will also have some exposure towards hydrocarbons, which could be good, could be bad, depends on your strategy. But they have granted licenses, likely because they are actually granted as oil and gas licenses for almost 20,000 square kilometers. They have 70% of this new project and an option to buy the rest. This is, again, a company who recently acquired, like some of the other companies, some assets and are likely paying it with shares. This company, interestingly enough, also has some geothermal licenses in the part of, I remember to be the southeastern part of Australia, where mining and especially oil and gas is a bit more difficult to get. In Victoria and Queensland, they don't seem to fancy that much exploration, but geothermal is trendy, so they have some licenses. I don't know what strategy they have concerning this, but they do hold that. It's on their website. Current market cap is 3.5 million Aussie dollars, and that seems, again, like it's one of the smaller companies, just compared to the peers we discussed earlier. Then we have D3 Energy, which has, again, also in South Australia, almost 6,000 square kilometers, granted license. Again, they just recently took over this project, and it's both hydrogen, helium, hydrocarbon project that they want to pursue at some point. But right now, if you look into D3 Energy, they are very focused on their South African methane and helium project. And for reason this not being hydrogen, I haven't deep dived into it, but it looks like they've been putting out some interesting news lately, that they might be close to, or maybe have, at least looking at their stock price, announced some discoveries in these wells that has excited the stock market. And this means, of course, results in that D3 Energy has roughly 50 million US or Aussie dollar market cap. So for investors who want only exposure to a little bit of natural hydrogen, maybe it's an option, but they're still very early stage in their dipping the toe in the natural hydrogen industry. And then until recently, in South Australia, we also had burgeoning, which is an oil and gas company that had big amounts of applications in South Australia. This have now been sold off to Coloma, Australia, not a public company. We'll touch on it quickly at the end, but that if some really nerdy Australian investors thinking, oh, you forgot burgeoning, it's because they sold recently. I'll be so happy if you are out there, nerdy Australian investor guy, and knew this already. Reached out, we got to chat more then.
Yeah.
But then moving out of South Australia, there are, especially Western Australia and Northern Territory, very reasonably to believe that you will soon be able to get an actual natural hydrogen license in these areas. I would call it, almost certain. Western Australia, I know for a fact, has been trying to do this for a long time, but you need to pass some new laws, and it seems to be caught up in should it be together with some helium or some renewable energy, but eventually it will happen. So it means that you have now companies working in these areas, very likely through a helium license that they expect to turn into hydrogen. So I don't see that as a very big problem, but it is some kind of a risk. I don't think it's not a risk that they won't be able to get it, but it is a risk that it will take a very long time for the lawmakers to actually make a decision, as we see sometimes in Europe, especially. But
no comment. No comments there.
No comment. Yeah, exactly. There are so many things. But you have a really fun fact. Central Petroleum has been doing oil and gas for a long time. They have some joint ventures with Santos, one of the big oil and gas companies in what seems to be, Northern Territory. And in these areas, there's also potential for helium and hydrogen. At one point, they were trying to sell these assets, but that failed. So obviously, looking from the outside, it's not a company that is that much focused on hydrogen, but it is part of their communication. It's in their actual license area, and also it's a profitable company. They're making money, and this is so rare in industry because they're
Sadly.
actually producing oil and gas. But whether or not they would jump on the chance to sell their hydrogen assets, if possible, and helium assets, we don't know. But it's they're in the space. Um, Another interesting one is Constellation Resources. They're working in Western Australia. And Western Australia, generally speaking, this is where things gets really remote. Sorry, Western Australia, but most of you live in Perth, so it gets a bit far out. You could be lucky with some infrastructure, pipelines, roads. We will not go into the weeds, but it also means you can get really big license, and the license that Constellation has or application is almost 90,000 square kilometers. And what's interesting is if you're really nerdy and you really want to have different exposure in the industry, Constellation are pursuing, amongst other things, kind of organic source, a hydrogen source from coal bed or organic shales, a bit different from the only, iron water reaction that we see
Ah.
very often, or from the mantle that we also see some of the Canadians pursuing. Um, I find that interesting. It's a company that also still does a lot of mining. It's a copper, nickel, copper, gold exploration company as well. So you do get a mix of, maybe trendy exposure for this company, and with an almost 10 million Aussie dollar market cap right now.
I wanted to mention something, Morten, because you have previously said, at least in 2 or 3 videos, that the map behind you is of the US because it helps you uh, visualize better the geography of the US. In my case, I'm going to have to get an Australian map because when you said Western Australia is very remote, I said, well, to me, all of Australia is remote except for the coast. So I can't visualize the remoteness differences in each of the sectors. So I will have to get, please, if somebody has an interesting map, send me an Amazon link or something. I will check it out.
I think there must be some really good ones with, light pollution. You would see that of course,
Ah,
Australia in general, I think there's less than 60 million people. And, so then later when we'll compare it to US, that of course has something to say that there's simply less people living there. But I remember when I was in Perth, I think last year, there's 2.5 million people living in Western Australia, and almost 2.2 million of them lives in Perth. I could be wrong on some of the numbers. Sorry, Australian guys, but it's just, yeah, that is a big thing. But you do have a lot of mining and oil and gas work in these areas, so it's not to say that you can't get it out of there. It's just not, you won't have a hydrogen refueling station right next to it. You won't have an ammonia plant right next to it. You will have to do some transportation, obviously, but sure, it can be solved. We have 2 more public companies left in Australia. There's Georgina Energy in Western Australia. They are listed in London, actually. One of only 3 companies in the industry I remember being listed in London, where we mostly see Canada and Australia. Um, that's also a hydrocarbon, helium, hydrogen play, with the thought of, at least in one of their 2 projects, to re-enter an old well. I remember them wanting to drill back into an old well and then puncture through some layers that they think could hold some interesting stuff below. It's a 6.4 million pounds market cap, and yeah, it's looks interesting. It's difficult for me to exactly figure out how much focus is on natural gas and what is hydrogen and helium. Um, and then finally, as mentioned earlier, Top End Energy. That is actually, it's an Australian listed company. They are mostly known for their Kansas acreage. They took over Serpentine Energy some time ago. Luke is the CEO. Walter Trop, I think. Sorry, Luke, if I murder your last name. But mostly known for the Kansas project. But they do also hold some legacy licenses in the Amadeus Basin and MacArthur Basin. I hope I'm pronouncing Amadeus right.
it's probably
I would say Amadeus,
Amadeus.
but the
Amadeus.
Australians but they say Amadeus. look, Anthony, I'll let you know they do. But
Okay.
uh, yeah, but they do have some legacy assets that seems to be prone to both natural hydrogen, but natural gas, helium. So you do actually, through Top End Energy, get some kind of exposure to both US and Australia natural hydrogen. And this is actually, the only company offering this as of right now.
And their properties, the location. I was looking at the map recently because I was writing something about them, and their properties are within Coloma's in the US, within Coloma's sites. So it's very interesting that if Coloma finally, well, eventually, maybe by 2050, no, I'm just kidding, eventually at some point announces a natural hydrogen find, it might cause a very big upward growth or a surge in Top End Energy's value. So something to watch, I think.
I think no doubt both Top End and Hytera works in is this Kansas area, and we'll let's deep dive on it in the US episode. But no doubt it's someone announces something that looks really interesting. Full disclosure, we were early investors in Serpentine Energy, and one of the reasons was that they're right where the big guys are. That looks interesting, and which we still think. Um, but speaking of, private companies, Coloma, there are some private companies operating in Australia, even if it's due to tradition, very easy to list your resource company. Many companies will do it in Australia, but you do have one of the early ones, H2EX or H2X, just on the other side of the bay where Adelaide is based in South Australia. A granted license, been doing quite a lot of work. As it's a private company, we don't know much. Um, you also have recent entrants of the Coloma Australia company, and be aware this is not exactly Coloma. This is for me. Uh, it's the same family as Coloma US. I understand Coloma US owns some of it, and they have some similar investors, and they rely on the Coloma US technologies. But it's a company created to work exclusively in Australia. Private company that took over Buru energy assets in South Australia, and also works in Tasmania, and has a joint venture in Tasmania on some applications with Devil Resources, which, again, full disclosure, Natural Hydrogen Ventures have invested into Devil Resources. Tasmania, I understand, is something that often gets forgotten by general Australians because it's a small island, and maybe we forget it too. But because you can actually get a license in Tasmania as well, with Devil Resources getting one of the first ones. So Devil Resources is obviously also a private company having a big chunk in northern Tasmania as well as geothermal licenses, and then the joint venture with Coloma Australia. So there's a few more private companies, but as you can hear, a lot of Australian companies, and we'll likely see more as the rest of Australia opens more up for natural hydrogen exploration.
Thank you, Morten. Thank you so much for listing all of these companies. And we are approaching the final question, which is the big one, right? The verdict between Australia versus the USA. Which is better? Which is more promising? But I wanted to ask just one thing personally. I was about Australia has the remote problem. Let's say there are many places which might be full of hydrogen, let's say, but it won't be that easy to distribute this hydrogen to the places where they're needed. What would you say is a problem when it comes to this? When it comes to finding hydrogen in the middle of nowhere, how would you reassure maybe an investor or a company who finds something out there out in the wild?
Well, I think first, that's a really good subject for another episode. The what to do with the hydrogen when it's found. But I think generally it should be remembered that hydrogen is hydrogen, and due to its natural properties, it's not as easy or low cost to move it around as oil and gas, because it has a lower energy density, but also because you simply haven't built the infrastructure already. Because of course, if we make a massive discovery, we'll just build pipelines. That'll be great. It's the cheapest option. But as an impatient investor, won't sure I have the patience to wait for that to happen, building the pipelines. But that's if the discovery is big enough, it won't be a problem. The value would hold until pipelines are being built. But if you have the possibility, and I know many of these exploration companies think of this, they will try to go for areas that are as close as possible to some kind of market option. Um, but back to US versus Australia, and I think the reason you're asking is because I think I've probably said a few times that I think US is where this industry is going to take off for a lot of reasons. We have a whole episode dedicated to this subject, and it's because it's much easier to get going in the US. You get, as I said in the beginning, it's much smaller licenses that you get in the US because you got to ask the landowner, but you can get going. And when comparing US assets holding and Australian assets holding, it's impossible to say what's best. And no doubt the Australians are really big, but is it realistic that you can actually do proper, research? Can you actually develop this properly when it's so big? You can't do everything. It'll probably be too expensive. So there's pros and cons. But mainly, I think where I still think US is in the lead as a country, it's because it's so much cheaper to do business. It's the cheapness of drilling, and then the proximity to markets, meaning that you can also
Yes.
very likely commercialize a smaller discovery many places in the US and only a few places in Australia. So country by country, yeah, I still think that US will be where this happens first. But as soon as that happens, well, let's get back. Let's do a new episode when that happens, because then new dollars will be attracted into Australia, Canada, and as oil and gas industry will tell you, if there's enough money, we can, develop it. We'll just pay more money to drill the wells. We'll find it. It'll still be good business.
Yeah, that's good. That's fantastic. Actually, I wanted to mention to our viewers, uh, before Morten just said that, I didn't know what he was going to say. So this is also news for me that the US is still above the rest, basically. So it's nice to see that you gave us a solid response and not just one of those YouTube responses. So at the end of the day, pick your best location and just decide to stick with it. So one thing I wanted to mention was when you said markets, the proximity to markets is very interesting because, for example, the mid-continental rift, which is where these top-end energy, high terra, Coloma, and others are looking, there is a proximity to I think it was 5 billion ammonia market. I might be making these figures up, but they're already very well connected to several states. The ammonia pipeline goes through. So it's interesting to see that. And in Australia, we would need to see where they're located, where they're finding hydrogen in the future to say, well, this could be the equivalent of the mid-continental rift. But for now, the MCR is still the best place maybe globally. Is that an exaggeration maybe?
I think what is very unknown right now is what kind of geology will work best. But yeah, from a surface point of view, where the mid-continental rift in the US moves through, you have farmers who use ammonia directly as fertilizers. You have many things going for it. So yeah, obviously that is some extra points. But I want to stress, I think this is important. When I compare, because it's fun in a YouTube video, US, Australia, and I think US has some, advantages here. I am not saying that US focused companies are better investments.
Very important.
Because that means there's a lot of other things coming into play,
Yes.
Because everything, even good shares companies can be too expensive. There's so many, and there will be companies working in an area in Australia that has a better market access than a company in US. It's still very big countries. So this is important. This is not a discussion of whether or not the public traded US focused companies or the Australian companies are better deals. It's just where will likely the broader industry get more traction. We've seen it already. There's so many more wells drilled in the US than in Australia. So it's not like something I'm making up. It has happened already. But yeah, crucial.
And finally,
No investment advice.
Yeah. And finally, I think the X factor is also legislation, because we don't know where natural hydrogen is going to be in terms of priorities in the next few years in the US versus Australia. Maybe in Australia it blows up, and maybe in the US it blows up, but in the negative way, so to speak. So, well, thank you for watching our episode. Thank you, Morten, for sharing so much insight on Australia and the companies operating in Australia. I want to remind you, if you want a lot of what we shared today, you can find it in the Natural Hydrogen Investor Report 2025. It's on our website, h2investing.com. Once you sign up for it, you subscribe to our newsletter, which is bi-weekly, and it has a lot of information. I enjoy writing it, so I make sure it's very fun to read too. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube, like and subscribe, share it with your colleagues, and listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. The podcast comes out every 2 weeks. So that's all for today. Thank you, and stay tuned for our next episode and for the next episode of our, I forgot the name for a second, the Natural Hydrogen Nations miniseries. See you.